Hey, y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle Housing Market Watch for February 25th, 2025. Well, just as the mortgage updates have been getting boring, we've started to see mortgage rates coming down here over the last week, and we've gone from 7.02% on last week's Mortgage News Daily Survey to 6.8% on this week's Mortgage News Daily Survey. So we are seeing rates coming down. Of course, they are always changing every single day. But as of now, we've been seeing rates trending down over the past week, which is good for buyers, right? Makes things more affordable. Now, the change isn't dramatic at this point, so it's not substantial, but it is trending in the direction that buyers would like to see as we're heading into the spring housing market here in Seattle. And as we're heading towards the spring, what we're seeing is more listings continuing to come on the market. Looking at week over week numbers for King and Snohomish County, which is what we're doing in this update, the general Seattle metro area, we're seeing fewer new listings than we did last week, 446 versus 478. Not very different, but a little bit fewer listings. We're seeing some more price reductions. So we saw 204 price reductions last week versus 166. And again, looking at those numbers, right, that's a little less than half of the new listings. So some things are selling over asking price fairly quickly. A lot of it has to do with the house itself and then also maybe the pricing strategy, right? There are different ways to price a home. Sometimes the pricing up high is when you start to see some of those price reductions. Conversely, sometimes when you see the low price that you go, there's no way that house is going to sell for that price. And that's where you see over asking price, right? And the competition. And sometimes they even get higher than that high price. I personally like to list more in that true market value range in between probably those two extremes. And it's great to get a few extra offers, multiple offers, but it's also way better to not give the house away if you end up getting one offer at a lower price, but also not sit forever and end up chasing the market down and potentially selling for even less if you go for that high price out of the gate. So there's usually a good sweet spot there. Again, everybody likes a different strategy, and I've used all of those strategies depending on the client. But this time of year, it becomes really important how you price the house, because you could be that house that's priced above all the other houses on the market, and maybe your house is a little bit better, but if you're too far off from those other houses, you're going to be the outlier that everybody's looking at as the overpriced house. They're going to go and pay even more, potentially, with competition, for a house that's listed for less, and it would have behooved the buyer to pay and buy your house instead of that other one, but again, it's just what they see on the surface, and they see that that house is overpriced, at least in their mind, even though the other ones end up selling for more, generally speaking. Again, just interesting psychology heading into the spring. Everything is seasonal here in Seattle, and I would say in most markets, things are seasonal and maybe even different in a way, right? Some markets might be seasonably hot in the winter, maybe like Arizona would be a little different than Seattle or Minnesota, right? Everybody has different weather patterns and different seasonality to their housing markets, but ours tends to follow more of a hot spring market and kind of middling summer market, things picking up a little in the fall and then slowing off in the winter. And so we're kind of coming out of that now as we're approaching spring, and we're seeing more listings coming on the market, more pending sales, 691 this week versus 603 the previous week. Sold listings also up, 422 versus 400 the previous week. And as we near the end of the month, that's normal, right? There's nothing I'm seeing here that's out of the ordinary at this point. I have shared over the previous few weeks that I think we're going to see the peak of the market a little earlier this year than we have in the past couple years. And I think the reason for that is because we are seeing more inventory coming on than we have over the past few years. And I don't know. It doesn't seem that there are that many more buyers. And so if the inventory continues to come on the market at the same pace and a little bit more now than in previous months or in previous years, then I think we would see that inventory buildup hitting the market earlier than maybe the beginning of the summer, maybe late spring, which happens sometimes. Now, last week I introduced some new data, and I want to continue with that because I think it's a really good insight, right? So I'll stop explaining it every time, but I want to just give a quick intro. Again, this is the pending sales over the last week, the MLS, and I can set different date ranges, but I'm doing it just for the past week. We are seeing the activity in Snohomish County, and then we'll look at King County next, specifically, and we'll look at median sales price. We'll look at average price to list ratio, which I think is helpful for how much am I going to need to pay to buy this house. We'll get to look at pending sales with multiple offers, inspection addendums, financing addendums, and lastly, escalation addendums. So it's a really good gauge of how competitive is the market, and we can dial it into specific cities. And just for the sake of time, we don't have that in these updates. So if you have a specific city in mind where you're curious, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to get this data over to you as well. You can email me or reach out to me over text, and I'm happy to share some of this data with you for specific cities. Again, we're more broad in these updates, but happy to get you that info for your city and location. Now let's look at Snohomish County here. So Snohomish County over the last week, median sales price was $799,950. Previously $727,500. So we're seeing prices trending up. Again, this is just a snapshot of a week, so we don't want to count this as prices are going up, but at least as far as these numbers, we're seeing higher average, or in this case, median sales prices in Snohomish County than we did last week. So higher price listings selling. We're seeing that the average list price to pending sale price is 100%. So again, some are selling for over, some are selling for less. That's why it's called an average. But on average, that's what we're seeing in Snohomish County. We are seeing, though, more competition. And that's what I noticed as I looked at all of this. Pending sales are up 7%, up to 37% with multiple offers. We're seeing fewer, actually 14% fewer pending sales in Snohomish County with an inspection addendum. Again, people removing that to be more competitive. We're seeing a 10% drop off in sales with a financing addendum, right? And we're also seeing an uptick here in pending sales, only 2% with an escalation addendum. So 12% total for pending sales with an escalation addendum. Looking at this data, what it's telling me is a lot of the sales are happening right at or around the asking price, but more and more of them are removing contingencies, again, not costing them more money, but removing some of those protections in the contract to get the deal done and to separate themselves versus paying a whole bunch more. But again, still 12% with that escalation addendum. That doesn't mean that it's only 12% that sold over asking price though, because some buyers will be more aggressive and they will pay a certain amount over the asking price out of the gate, no escalation addendum. And so looking at these numbers, it's not an exact translation to the amount of over asking price offers, but it is a good reference point to see kind of how buyers are handling these situations. Now, let's look at King County as well here. King County had the same phenomena, right, as Snohomish County. We saw an uptick in that unpublished median sales price, $940,000 last week over all of King County. The amount over asking price was actually 2% on average. So King County in general saw more competition, at least on price, than Snohomish County did. 2% over asking price, not a large amount, but that's pretty typical for this time of year as the competition is building. And what we're seeing as well is more pending sales with multiple offers. So 43 versus 40. So last week we had 40%, this week 43%, 3% increase there. Pending sales with inspection addendum, 36% last week, 37% in King County this week. So King County, if you recall, and I'll even share this, was about the same as far as the amount over asking price too. So I'm not surprised to see those numbers not changing too much. Pending sales with a financing addendum, 63% last week, 62% this week. Again, pretty much the same. And then pending sales with an escalation addendum, 16% last week, 17% this week. So the market's remaining fairly similar in King County. We saw some higher price listings sell. Again, not surprising. Every week's a little bit different there. And that's why we average the data out over the entire month on our monthly market updates. But to continue with that trend, the spring market is picking up. And for buyers, that means more competition. When you are making an offer, it means things are going to sell faster. And for sellers, that means you're most likely going to get some more competition. Now, as a reminder, this is single family data, right? Condos are very different right now in the Seattle area. And without pulling any special data to talk about it, the inventory numbers for condos are about double for the single family houses across King and Snohomish County, and they are not selling as quickly, taking in a lot of cases double the time or even more to sell. And in a lot of cases, selling below asking price and sometimes significantly versus the single family houses. And a lot of that stems back to COVID a few years back when people were getting out of condos and looking for single family houses. There are more people looking at condos now than in the past couple years, but we're still seeing that there's just been kind of a backlog of condos on the market for a while, and that has not changed here yet. So just some thoughts on the condos. Overall, though, the housing market is following normal trends so far this year. Interest rates have been moving a little bit. There's been nothing to stimulate buyers jumping into the market that weren't already planning to buy. And also, there's not enough of a drop to really push people that own a house to sell that house and cash it in for something different. So now, as we continue through the spring, I do expect this year still at this point to mirror kind of what we saw last year, which was a somewhat competitive spring, not hyper competitive, but somewhat competitive spring, and then a little bit of a slower summer season, maybe even earlier in the summer, late spring than we saw last year. So if you have more questions about your situation, personally, you want to connect, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer emails or phone calls, text. You can also drop a comment in the video. I'm happy to connect with you that way. And of course, if there's any way I can continue to bring value to you with these videos, please hit that subscribe button.